Okay, hi everyone, and thank you first of all to Josh and Jan for organizing this symposium. I'm really excited to be here. My name is Marlene, and I'm very happy to be presenting some of the work with my colleagues Marina Proft, Lydia Schidelko, Hannes Rakoczy, and Jan Engelmann from either Göttingen or UC Berkeley. And I want to talk about social metacognition. So basically adopt a social perspective on what we know about metacognitive development. So metacognition is foundational for mature human thought. Most generally, it can be understood as cognition about cognition. But to narrow this down a little bit more, what I mean with metacognition today is the ability to represent and to reflect on different epistemic states. The many decades of research from a variety of angles have yielded some controversies about what we know about the development of these metacognitive abilities. And one approach to resolve these discussions is to acknowledge that there might be different forms or developmental patterns indicating a dual nature of metacognition, so to speak. For example, we can differentiate between the typical implicit or explicit or procedural versus analytical or declarative metacognition, where the latter always involve more explicit metacognitive judgments, often relying on verbal reports, while the implicit forms might not be truly metacognitive, not truly meta-representational, sorry, but more basic or first-order processes that would give rise to, for example, metacognitive feelings that can then, in turn, guide behavior adaptively. We'll come back to this later, but a more important account for my means today is along similar lines, other accounts that differentiate individual versus social functions of metacognition. This is in the spirit of a more general class of theories that emphasize the social origins and nature of higher human cognition. And one particular account that's important for our project here is the dual systems framework by Shea and colleagues who postulate two systems with respective functions on either an intrapersonal or a suprapersonal level. The interesting claim here, if we take a closer look at that, is that the core function and scope of explicit metacognition is social. So it allows suprapersonal cognitive control and cooperation. And if we look at this adapted figure I took from the authors, the idea is that explicit metacognition, so the second system, allows to explicitly represent one's own individual metacognitive representations and then share them with other agents, which is obviously important when the individual engages or tries to engage in complex social interaction and cooperation with others. In other words, this explicit metacognition fulfills a crucial social role and becomes functional primarily in interpersonal communication and cooperation. This idea of social purposes and functions, as I said before, is in line with other claims about humans' higher cognition. Just to name another prominent example is the argumentative theory of reasoning by Missy and Sperber, where they argue that the proper domain and function of explicit reasoning is in fact social. Now, if we turn back to metacognition and say that the pivotal function and context of this explicit metacognition is social, one could come up with an interesting ontogenetic claim. So you could say that there might be earlier metacognitive competence in certain social contexts, specifically those that tap those core social functions of explicit metacognition. And this is already the main rationale behind the studies that I'm going to present today. But before elaborating on that, let's first take a look at what we know about the metacognitive development so far. Overall, the literature paints a picture of protracted development. So on one hand, we have early, mainly implicit forms of metacognition that can be observed both in young children and non-human animals. For example, 2-year-old children, as well as non-human primates or other monkeys, look for more information when they lack specific pieces of information, or when given the opportunity to skip difficult trials, they do so they opt out, or selectively ask for help when they are uncertain. On the other hand, we see a rather late emergence of explicit metacognition. For example, we see a striking pattern of overconfidence in preschool children that persists until rather late in children's development. So this overconfidence shows, for example, when children overestimate their ability to remember a list of words, how well they will perform in a test, or more generally, when they're asked to reflect on their states of knowledge. Particularly under so-called partial ignorance, children seem to struggle with such metacognitive insight. So the standard task to test this is a hiding task where an experimenter hides something inside a box and then asks children whether they know what's inside. And Rova and colleagues conducted a systematic experiment with varying epistemic states of the children. So in so-called full knowledge conditions, children are basically shown the content of a box, whereas in so-called total ignorance conditions, they are completely ignorant as to what the box contains. And what the literature reveals quite robustly is that children as young as 3 years of age correctly acknowledge their respective epistemic states. So they correctly claim to know under full knowledge and correctly acknowledge their ignorance under total ignorance conditions. Interestingly, in so-called partial ignorance conditions, the only thing that changes is that children are shown a set of possible objects before the hiding event, and when they are then asked whether they know what's inside, a completely different pattern emerges. So 3 to 5-year-old children display a striking overconfidence here and incorrectly claim to know what's inside this box. Only with school age, around 6 years, they overcome this overconfidence and then correctly acknowledge that they don't know. This metacognitive failure is typically interpreted as evidence for this late emerging explicit metacognition. An alternative thought would be that children's metacognitive competence might be underestimated, which gives rise to the question whether this late development here reflects an actual competence deficit or whether there might be performance limitations, especially when you consider what I just said about the social framework, and then thinking about how the standard test context is a purely academic interaction between the main experimenter and the children, where nothing really depends on the children's answers, right? So a potential factor that might mask children's performance here could be the test context that might not be sufficiently social. And this is what we do, or this is what we did to approach this question. So our hypothesis was that explicit metacognitive competence might be masked by the non-social context of previous tasks, whereas we could expect earlier competence to be revealed in appropriate and sufficiently social test contexts. Our aim was therefore to introduce a social paradigm for the partial ignorance task. Importantly, I want to mention that we define social here in the sense of a helping context, which is communicative, in the sense that children and another person, our second experimenter here, can naturally interact and communicate with each other, and cooperative in that E2 relies on the specific information from the children in order to achieve their joint goal. So here are also costs involved for inaccurate responses by the children. All right, let me explain in more detail. So similar to the standard task, there's an experimenter hiding one of several toy animals inside this box here. And however, the crucial difference here is that not E1, but a second experimenter, E2, asked the children whether they knew which toy was inside, and this whole task being embedded in a cooperative setting, so that in which E2 and the children jointly collected stickers when they said the correct animal, which was inside the box. We conducted 3 studies with 3 and 5-year-old children. 162 children participated overall. And in each study, we had 2 conditions in a within-subjects design. So each child participated in 2 trials per condition, of course in counterbalanced order, either when they sat in front of the transparent window here, which constituted our control full knowledge condition, or in front of the blurry window on the other side of the box, which constituted the test partial ignorance condition. Okay. In our first study, we implemented this just as I described, and E2 was asking the children, can you help me, can you tell me which animal it is? So we ended up coding, or what we were after was any expressions of uncertainty. So we coded whether children answered with uncertainty markers such as I don't know, or maybe, or not really sure. Also, if they try to look for more information, or like just displaying nonverbal uncertainty. I brought a video with subtitles. I hope this works. It doesn't work. Okay, this is too bad, but I'll just continue with the results then, because of the time. All right, so just to walk you through this, we see the 3- and 5-year-old children and the proportion of uncertainty expressions on the y-axis, and we see the conditions, our full knowledge and partial ignorance conditions on the x-axis. And if you think about what we would expect here, we would expect little uncertainty in the full knowledge condition here. And if our social approach is fruitful, we would expect much uncertainty over here. And this is what we found both for the 3- and the 5-year-old children. And our models confirmed that children that condition was a significant predictor for how children spontaneously expressed their uncertainty in front of this blurry window. So this led us to the first conclusion that with our social approach, children as young as 3 years overcame their overconfidence in a social paradigm of a partial ignorance task. However, we were a little bit concerned about our ambiguous and vague test question if you compared with with a more concrete "do you know this" question, and also because we coded any signs of uncertainty, right? So we addressed this in our second study, which was basically the same, except that we altered the test question and only coded explicit ignorance acknowledgements. So definite answers, no, I don't know, or yes, I do know, yes. I'm very sad that this doesn't work because this is my favorite video of all time, where we see this 3-year-old not confidently, but answering a sheep. And then when the follow-up question, do you know this, comes, she's like, no. So this is quite cute. Anyways, okay. So what did we find? Basically, we found the same trends. So both 3- and 5-year-old children again explicitly acknowledged that they did not know what this box contained in our partial ignorance condition. And we found a significant interaction effect here with condition and age group, which broke down to the effect for the 3-year-old children just being bigger than that for the 5-year-old children. So both age groups still explicitly acknowledged their ignorance. So we can conclude here that our finding holds, and a social test context might be helpful to overcome their overconfidence. However, you might object that we have this nice blurry window here at our box, which might raise the concerns that this serves as a visual representation or reminder of children's uncertainty or ignorance. So we addressed this in our final study here, which was conducted exactly the same, only with 3-year-old children now though, because we would expect the same effect of the blurry window for both age groups, right? So we only tested the younger ones. And then crucially, we covered the blurry window, so children sat in front of a completely opaque side here. And again, a cute 3-year-old who correctly acknowledged that he did not know. And then here the results again, and yeah, again, we replicated that condition, but none of the other predictors significantly predicted children's ability to explicitly We also compared directly in exploratory analyses the 3-year-old children's performance in front of the no window, our third study, and the blurry window, and this just confirmed again that not the window per se, but only the condition significantly predicted children's metacognition here. Sorry, I'm rushing a little bit because I'm running out of time. So let me wrap this up for a bit. So again, 3-year-old children explicitly acknowledge their ignorance, and the blurry window does not sufficiently explain the earlier competence that we found in our previous studies here. So the finding holds. But of course, overall, we need to discuss this. So children as young as 3 years of age succeeded in our social paradigm of the well-established partial ignorance metacognitive conditions or tasks. So cooperative and communicative interaction might help in successfully monitoring one's own epistemic states. The blurry window might also help, but we have to look further into that. Overall, our findings here are in line with the social metacognition framework, where there's special emphasis on this communicative and cooperative exchange with other partners or agents. This again suggests ontogenetic primacy of social metacognition. Of course, we do have to address more open questions, so we compared this new approach with previous existing studies, right? So we lack a direct comparison with an individual version of our paradigm. More interestingly, maybe, future studies should address the question of which specific social mechanisms drive this account or drive this beneficial effect. For example, contrast helping paradigms, more cooperative paradigms, maybe even, some competition or other situations that involve more costs or higher costs. And then of course, how generalizable is this? Does this phenomenon apply to other domains of metacognition or even beyond that, to other cognitive capacities? Right. So I believe that this is a promising perspective on metacognitive development, and I'm really looking forward to what comes next. And I want to thank my collaborators and everybody involved in the studies, and you, of course. Thank you.
It looked like in experiment 2, the 3-year-olds were better than the 5-year-olds.
In the second study, you mean?
Yeah,
it's really interesting, right?
Do you have an idea about why?
Yeah, I really want to dig deeper into that. I mean, I don't know for sure. It's probably up for more empirical data. One guess, or one educated guess maybe, might be that overconfidence also fulfills some social function, especially in this age range where children engage more in peer group settings, in kindergarten or whatever. So there might be, also more group belongingness or something like that, which then again might be boosting overconfidence. I don't know, I'm very curious about that myself. Thanks.
I have a clarification question. In study 2, you have 2 questions, right? They're asked to children. The first is whether they know, and then you ask again, do you know? And then you gave the example of the video that we couldn't see.
Yeah.
And you said that actually the child produced a guess, but then said, no, I actually don't know about it. So I wonder, you coded only the second answers, right? The answers to the second question, right? But how many children of those actually tried to guess and then said, oh, I actually don't know really?
That's a really interesting and very important point. Thanks for bringing that up. So we only followed up with the second question if children produced a guess without marking whether they knew or did not know. And I do have the numbers. I still have to analyze them though. So sorry, I don't have a specific answer right now. But anecdotally, yeah, I don't know what I can say about that right now from the top of my head, but those data here involved both children's answers that spontaneously expressed their ignorance, as well as children who produced a guess first and then, you know, kind of, yeah, acknowledged, oh no, I'm not sure, I don't know, yeah. Thanks. All right, okay.